So this is a story about my great-great-grandmother who lived up in Jämtland, Sweden. She grew up together with her big sister as girls of a rich farmer, and they had great, beautiful lands and a lot of money. And each girl had this big dowry, a big sum of money for their future husband. Um, so naturally, the parents took good care in who they would choose to marry, and they were very pleased when the oldest daughter chose the youngest son, a student in medicine, from a very extinguished family from the capital. So the future husband and his whole family went to Jämtland to stay for weeks before the wedding, planning and settling all the affairs. But then the bigger sister, the bride to be, fell suddenly very ill. She couldn't eat much, but the groom, the young man in love, took it as his duty to stay by her side, comfort her, and make sure that she ate as much as she possibly could, bringing her all the food himself. Everybody was very touched by this. Also, my grandmother, who stayed by her sister's side, playing her violin to soothe her bigger sister's vivid stomach pains. But nothing helped, and just a few days before the wedding, the big sister died. Everybody was struck by grief. The families were struck by grief, and the groom was struck by grief, but now they had to plan for a funeral in the midst of everything. And what about the big wedding that was coming up? Hundreds of people had been invited, and the animals had already been slaughtered, and a lot of money were spent. So they decided that the little sister could take her bigger sister's stead, and then none of this would have been in vain, and the family would still get the future son-in-law they so desperately wanted. So my grandmother, torn by her feelings, went to her sister's bed and cried by her side and wanted to play the violin one last time for her bigger sister. But in a flash, all the strings broke on the violin, and she didn't want to leave her, but she still wanted to play for her one last time. So she took a small scissor from the dressing table and cut some fine strings of her sister's long, strong chestnut hair, and to her surprise, they worked excellent for the violin. Then the big day arrived, and she was the bride herself, and the feast and ceremony was gorgeous and luxurious, but she had a hard time keeping her spirit up. Grief was still in her heart. That was a problem her future husband didn't seem to have. He was stuffing himself and in good spirit. Perhaps the prospect of marrying the sister who now inherited the dowry of her older sister and therefore had twice the money had lightened his heart. Between courses, my great-grandmother took a violin to play a song for the guests. This was the song that she has composed as a present for her sister, as this wedding song that she unfortunately never got to hear herself. So she tuned the violin to play the song that she had prepared for her sister's wedding, and she started to play. But when she struck the first string, everybody's heart stopped, because from the violin this cry, the sad cry, seemed to emanate through the room, and the groom turned pale as a corpse by this. Then she played the second string, and the groom took to his stomach and mouth as if the food had suddenly sickened him. And on the third string, he got up shakingly and ran out, but only to take a few steps and then collapse on the floor, never to get up again. And the young groom, who in a few days' time were to marry two sisters, never married a single one.
So, this is the story of Amanda's grandmother in Salzburg, Sweden. And it's a tale of three sisters, including the grandmother, who is the middle child. And the oldest child, who was the ripe age for marriage, met one of the other families in Skarsberg, Sweden. And they thought it was the best for both families for the two eldest children to marry. And everyone was very happy, and everyone was really excited to plan this wedding. And this future husband was really doting to the oldest sister and kept on bringing her lots of delicious treats and food until she started to get a stomach ache. And everyone was so concerned, and it was a shock to everyone in this little village. And a couple of days after this older sister got a stomach ache, she died. And everyone was really shocked and really upset because in a couple of days it was going to be her wedding, and now they had to plan a funeral. And the two families decided the best thing to do was to marry this older son to the youngest daughter. That they still really wanted this guy to be in the family, might as well get the youngest daughter to marry him. And everyone's happy. So they plan that wedding, and they're planning the oldest sister's funeral. And the middle child, which is the grandmother, wanted to play a violin song for the dead oldest sister. So she goes to her death chamber and brings her violin, but before she could play, all of the strings broke very dramatically. Just goes everywhere. And she still wants to play this song for her oldest sister, so she cuts off strands of her chestnut hair and restrings the violin and is awesome, gonna play this beautiful song. And so then, yes, they have that funeral. And then it's the wedding. It's the wedding day. And the middle sister wanted to play the violin for the oldest guy, and the youngest sister to play this wedding song. And everyone was very happy, and this guy was pretty stoked. He was having a good wedding day because he gets to marry into this family, and not only does he get the oldest sister's money, he gets the youngest sister's money as well, that he kind of gets paid out both times, which is pretty awesome. So he's having a good day. Yeah, he's having a good day. He's getting married, and he's got a lot of money. Cool. And he's about to hear the violin song. And so the younger child gets up and plays this violin song, and this wailing comes from the first string, and then she plays the second string, and it's even louder wailing, and the new husband starts to get ill, and when the third string is played, he falls down, and he never gets up. The end.
Hello. So this is the story of Amanda's grandmother, who grew up in Salzburg, Sweden, and her two siblings, her older sister and her younger sister. Amanda's grandmother was the middle child. And when they were younger, eligible bachelorettes, Amanda's grandmother's older sister was promised to marriage to this man. And when it was leading up to their marriage, somebody brought her some candy, and she ate, the older sister, she ate lots and lots of candy, and she felt really sick, and she dropped dead, and she never woke up again. And so the family thought, what a tragedy, because we really like this guy and we want to keep him in the family, so we'll promise him to marry the youngest sibling instead. That way he would stay in the family. And he was really, chuffed about this, because that means he inherited the fortune of his oldest wife to be and the youngest wife to be, so double the money for him. Amanda's grandmother, the middle child, was saddened by her sister's death, and she wanted to go and visit the body and play a song for her sister in her memory on her violin. So she goes down into the room and she picks up her violin to play, and suddenly all of the strings snap off and break. And she's so confused as to why this happens, but she doesn't let it stop her, and she plucks 3 of her chestnut hairs, restrings her violin, and goes to play again. But they snap again, and she can't play. Confused, she leaves the room. Some days pass, and it's coming up to the wedding day for the youngest sibling and the man. And Amanda's grandmother decides she wants to play a song for the wedding day. So again, she picks up her violin and goes to play the first note, and when she strikes the first string, an awful wail comes from the violin. And when she strikes the second string, a louder shriek comes from the violin. And finally, on the third string, she strikes it, and the man falls dead, never to wake up again.
Okay, so this is my continuation of the story Amanda wrote, and the story happens to be about her grandmother and her 2 siblings, the grandmother being the middle child. And growing up as young bachelorettes, they apparently grew up in Salzburg, Sweden. I'm guessing it should be Switzerland. Anyway, they were going about and being lovely young girls. They attracted suitors, and the family managed to find one particular man for the eldest sister, and they were engaged to be married, and everything was joy. But unfortunately, something happened, and apparently somebody came by and gave the elder sister a lot of sweets and things to eat, and she ate all of these sweets and became terribly ill, and in fact died from eating all these sweets, which was a terrible tragedy, not only for the family and the sisters, but also because now they would lose this wedding that the family had been hoping to follow through. So the family came up with the plan that they would pick one of the other sisters, the youngest sister, and marry her off instead to the groom. And he accepted, and he was chuffed about it, because not only would he now get the money from the other sister, even though they didn't really marry, but he would also get the money, the inheritance, allocated for the youngest sister. So he was thrilled with the prospects of getting a new wife and apparently double the money. Anyway, so the wedding plannings would continue, and they would now with the new bride, and Amanda's grandmother, the middle child. She was, of course, very saddened and struck by the sudden death of her elder sister. So she thought the right thing to do would be to go down into this room where apparently she had died, and then she wanted to play a song for her in commemoration of her memory. And so she picked her violin, and she wanted to start, and was just about to start playing, and then just as she was about to play, the strings burst, and the it was quite a shock, and they just fell off the violin, and Amanda's grandmother here, being quite a steady woman, was not scared by this, but just quite resourcefully thought to pluck out some of her own hairs, her chestnut hair, and use them for new violin strings. And then she put them on, and she's like, I'll have another go. And she tried again. But the second time also the strings shattered and were destroyed. And she was unable to play this song for her sister. But yeah, mission failed apparently. But anyway, the wedding plannings would continue, and soon it was the wedding day itself, and they were being wed. And then once again, the middle sister, Amanda's grandmother, wanted to play some music for the wedding couple to honor them here on their wedding day. So apparently she used some other material, or maybe her hair again, to restring the violin. But nevertheless, she took it forth and started playing. But something odd happened. When she struck the first chord, a terrible sound just emanated from it, like a terrible wail, as some other strange sound coming from the violin. And she plucked the second string, and then even higher, more shrilly voice came forth from this violin. And as she struck the third string, the effect was done, and the groom himself died and fell to the floor, never to wake up again. And yeah, that apparently how this gruesome story ends. So good luck.
This story comes to us from one of our very own, from Amanda. This story is about Amanda's grandmother. She was one of 3 sisters, and many, many years ago, these 3 young sisters grew up in a magical world called Salzburg, Switzerland. It was here in Salzburg that the family of Amanda's grandmother was approached by a mysterious man who came to the village of Salzburg, Switzerland. And he was completely infatuated with these 3 beautiful daughters, especially the eldest daughter. You see, Amanda's grandmother was the middle sister of the 3 sisters, and though she was sad that her older sister would soon be married and go to live her own life, she was happy as well, because she knew this was a good thing, and he seemed like a good man. And so, as the wedding day was slowly drawing upon them, the gentleman suddenly offered many sweets to Amanda's grandmother's sister, many sweets to show his love. And so he offered them to her, and she ate and she partook, and suddenly she fell ill. And to everyone's dismay, she passed away. For some reason, nobody thought that this was suspicious. They didn't feel that this young man bore her any ill will. No, so while their hearts were broken, they still had a fondness for this young man. And so, after the funeral, they decided, you know what? Perhaps you would like to marry our youngest daughter. Now, this gentleman was like a little bit upset. No, he was okay. He was like, yeah, okay, so not only am I going to get a dowry for the oldest daughter, I'll be getting a dowry from the youngest daughter as well. So he was totally all right with this, and he also maybe loved the younger daughter. So this wedding was going to proceed with a different daughter, but Amanda's grandmother was still mourning over the loss of her older sister, and so she crept down to the crypt where her sister's body lay, and she brought with her a violin, determined to play a funeral dirge of sorrow and mourning in commemoration of her older sister. So she pulled the violin from its box and placed the bow upon the strings and began to play the first note, and snap, twang, pop! all of the strings on the violin burst off. They snapped, they broke, and fluttered down to the floor of the crypt where they lay. Amanda's grandmother, she would not be stopped from playing this song for her older sister, and so she plucked the hairs from her own head, restrung the violin, and had it ready to go, and began to play this song for her sister, and once again, snap, pop, the strings broke, and they fell off the violin, fluttered to the ground. The song could not be played, but Amanda's grandmother swore she would play this song, but just not today. And so, lo and behold, the wedding was upon them. The younger sister was going to get married to this man, and at the wedding, Amanda's grandmother said, "I will play this song before you exchange vows." And so she gathered everyone around and pulled her violin from its case, this time restrung with the hairs of their fallen sister herself. And so Amanda's grandmother placed the bow on the violin and began to play the most sweetest, bittersweet, sorrowful song ever. And all the family leaned in and heard it, and their hearts were totally struck by this song, and they were aching, and it was beautiful. And tears were flowing down their faces, and they heard the most horrible retching, "Ah, ow!" And they all turned to see the man, this groom-to-be who had given the sweets that killed the oldest sister of Amanda's grandmother, and he was retching in pain and writhing and screaming, "Stop! Stop the song!" But Amanda kept playing. Amanda's grandmother kept playing this beautiful, sorrowful tune, and the man was shrieking, and in pain he was writhing until he collapsed and he fell to the ground, dead. And no one knew what to say. But that is the end of our tale.
Now this story comes to us from Amanda. Amanda, apologies for ruining your family heritage. Imagine, traveller, a strange land, a strange, fantastical, make-believe land, unlike any you've ever heard of before. The name of this place is Salzburg, Switzerland. I'm taking you away through the mists of time and introducing you to a young woman not called Amanda, but called Amanda's grandmother. A very common name from the time. Now, Amanda's grandmother had two sisters, who we shall call Amanda's grandmother's sister number 1 and Amanda's grandmother's sister number 2. Number 1 was older, number 2 was younger than Amanda's grandmother. Now, Amanda's grandmother's sister number 1 had a suitor, a young man, or possibly an old man, a man who was very, very attached to her. And she apparently, retributed the affection. So, they were going to get married, is the gist of it. They were going to get married. And but Amanda's grandmother was very suspicious about this character, this stranger to the mythical land of Salzburg, Switzerland. And she always she kept an eye on what this man wanted with her older sister, but no one else noticed anything weird going on. One day, this strange old young man gave Amanda's grandmother's older sister number 1, some sweets, some candies, just some sweets, and and she died. Yeah, a twist. Amanda's grandmother's sister number 1 died tragically. Oh my god, I realize this is probably real. I'm sorry. If she actually died, I didn't want to joke. This is horrible. But yeah, she passed away tragically. And of course, Amanda's grandmother was heartbroken by this, by the loss of her beloved sister. But her parents, quite callously, just told the man, well, it's all right, we've got two more sisters to spare. It's sad that you don't get to marry the one you wanted, but you do get Amanda's grandmother's sister number 2, the younger one. And he's like, done deal, because that way I get the dowage, the money from one and the money from the other. So it's like, fantastic. I am pleased as punch with this tragic turn of events. Amanda's grandmother is less pleased, understandably. So she decides to have a very intimate moment where she visits the crypts of the city where her sister is lying. I don't know how long she's been lying there, but so and Amanda's grandmother takes a violin, brings a violin with her, and decides, I want to play a piece for my sister to represent the love and the affection that I had for her. And as she is about to play a beautiful piece for her sister, snap, crackle, pop, all the strings burst. One of them stings her on the face and leaves a mark. Oh my god, it's all there's no more music. Where's the music gone? There's none. But she's like, no, I'm not having this. I'm still gonna play for my dead sister. So she takes hairs from her own head and she restrings the bow. Clever. But even that doesn't work for some reason. I think those strings also pop. So, you know, she's like, okay, fine. I went to all this effort with the hair. I'm going to try it again another time. There's no hurry right now. So the day of the wedding arrives. Because remember, the guy, the creepy guy, who maybe isn't creepy, he's marrying Amanda's grandmother, sister number 2. Day of the wedding, and Amanda's grandmother, she's got the violin again, and maybe she bought some new strings, or maybe she did the hair thing again. For this reason, the strings don't pop. So she starts to play, and her piece, it's so beautiful. It's such a piece of gorgeous music and melody. Everyone is weeping because it's so beautiful. I'll stop that now. That everyone is in tears, like, oh my god, this is the most gorgeous piece of music we've ever heard. But then there's also another sound, and that's a sound of what could that be? That's not coming from the violin. And they turn, and it's the man, the creepy dude. He's choking on some shit, I don't know. He's not having a great time, and he dies. And he's like, oh my god, what is this? Are these my sins or some cake? And that's it. And I think she just kept playing. And she just maybe she did a bit of no, you can't hear that. Yeah. And no one ever knew what else happened in that mythical land of Salzburg, Switzerland. Amanda, I'm so sorry.
So I'm gonna tell you a story that I believe is based on reality, and it's from our dear friend Amanda, and it's a story about her grandmother's experiences. So let me transport you back to a beautiful country, very far away, Salzburg. The country is not Salzburg, I believe the country is actually Austria, but the place is called Salzburg. And it's surrounded by these beautiful, misty mountains, and I imagine there's great cheese. Maybe that's Switzerland as well. Either way, so Amanda's grandmother, she grew up in Salzburg, and she had 2 sisters, sister 1 and sister 2. Sister 2 was the oldest one. And life was good in Salzburg.
though all of the sisters were unmarried. As a result of this, Amanda's grandmother's parents, Amanda's great grandparents, were arranging marriages for their daughters. And the oldest daughter, so that's sibling number one, sibling number one, she was the first in line to get married. So they found a good match, a suitable candidate, although Amanda's great or grandmother was not particularly keen on this gentleman. She always thought that there was something weird going around with this creepy guy. We just refer to him as Mr. X from now on. So Mr. X and Sister 1 were to get married. And I believe Amanda's great-grandparents paid a handsome dowry to this gentleman, Mr. X. And the arrangements for the wedding were coming into place and everything. And at some point, Sister 1 was offered candy. Shortly after this, she died, just like that. And Amanda's grandmother grew suspicious because she already did not like Mr. X, but this was possibly also a murder, poisoning with candy. So, either way, Mr. X was probably quite disappointed that his beloved died, or if it was a murder, I'm not sure. But either way, Amanda's great-grandparents were, since they had more daughters, they offered the second oldest daughter, so not the grandmother, but her sister, to this man. And the man was delighted by this because he got another dowry for the wedding. So he happily accepted, and they were going to proceed to get married. But before all of this, Amanda's grandmother was, of course, heartbroken, and she went to visit her perished sister in the city's crypt, and she brought her violin with her. And she was gonna play a nice tune for her perished sister, but the string snaps and they hit her in the face, and yeah, it was not good at all. And so she tried to make new strings out of her hair, but they also burst. It just didn't work. And yeah, that's what was happening. And after some time, the second wedding came up, and again, Amanda's grandmother had her violin with her, and she was going to play a beautiful piece that she had written specifically to her sister. I think it might have sounded a bit different, but this is just my interpretation of it. And either way, the wedding proceeded, and Amanda's grandmother still didn't like Mr. X. He was a weirdo, a creep. And just before the ceremony, or maybe after, but somewhere during that evening, he started choking and spitting and gushing, and it was awful, and he died. We still don't know exactly why he died, but one thing is for certain, and that's the fact that Amanda's great-grandmother was very pleased